Hello there! Right now, the Climate Change Conference in Paris is being held. The aim of this conference is that a vast majority of countries agree to a plan to decrease their amount of CO2 emissions. What is CO2? CO2 is a tiny molecule composed of one atom of carbon and two atoms of oxygen. The accumulation of CO2 in the air is mainly due to combustion reactions that come from industries. One of the main sources of CO2 accumulation comes from the octane combustion. When you are driving, octane reacts with O2 molecules. Together, they react to yield H2O molecules and CO2 molecules. Now, we know that H2O molecules aren't that bad, but CO2 molecules tend to accumulate in the air. When they are accumulated in the air, they contribute to what is called the greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect is when the energy is trapped in our atmosphere instead of just going out to space. This occurs in two steps. First step is when the sunlight rays come to the ground and reach the ground. As the solar radiation hits the ground, it can either be transmitted to the soil, resulting as heat, or be reflected through the air as infrared light. Infrared light, which is basically heat, can get absorbed by CO2 molecules. Imagine that the bonds that maintain the carbon and the oxygen atoms together are flexible. When infrared light hits the CO2, these bonds here will vibrate, such as in this elastic here. These elastic vibrations will induce more heat to be trapped inside the atmosphere, and thus they will not allow the infrared light that was scattered from the ground to go through space. You understand that the more CO2 molecules you have, the less you will have the infrared light to escape into space. So that's why CO2 is a major problem nowadays. But now the thing is it a problem that will be solved in this climate change conference in Paris? And the answer might be no. Indeed, you can't just stop the entire economy to run. Everything in the chemical industry is dependent on reactions that actually liberate a lot of CO2. Thus, from an economic point of view, and moreover, in a political point of view, this issue might not just be solved like that. Even if all nations actually come to an agreement about CO2 emission reduction, this will not change anything unless the concerned industries actually bring money to solve this problem. And how can we solve this problem from a scientific point of view? Research these last years proved that there is a solution for this problem. To reduce efficiently the CO2 levels in our atmosphere, we have two ways. The first one is sequestration of the CO2. That means that the CO2 will be confined, isolated, and converted into other molecules. This is a process that naturally occurs in plants. They convert CO2 and water to yield sugars and oxygen that we breathe. But we can also do it artificially, as we will see later. Another way to solve the problem will be to work out on the actual processes and all the chemical synthesis that allow me to have my clothes, this whiteboard, the plastics in my room, for instance. Everything around us is made through chemical processes that require a lot of fuels and also release a lot of CO2 molecules. In both ways, you see that scientific research is the key to these answers, because these answers won't come from politics or economics. Although some investments are required, of course, for these researches to occur. Thousands of research groups nowadays work on these two issues. The main principle of CO2 sequestration is to first bury the CO2 molecules and then force them to convert itself to another molecule. One of the most promising process is this one that occurs in basaltic rocks. First, CO2 is buried inside the basalt layer. The basalt layer is very rich in calcium oxide, and this reaction can take place. This reaction here requires a lot of energy because calcium carbonate is a less stable molecule than CO2. Thus, it will be easier for calcium carbonate to simply decompose itself to CO2 and calcium oxide rather than the forward reaction. There is a project occurring in Iceland. For those who are interested, you will find the link in the description. As I mentioned before, the plants and the trees also consume CO2 to produce sugars. It is also another viable way to sequestrate the CO2. This is why trees and plants are very important nowadays. But one of the underrated CO2 barriers is the ocean. Indeed, oceans can dissolve enormous amounts of CO2. This is explained because of the fact that dissolved CO2 reacts with water to give carbonic acid. As a matter of fact, the reverse reaction is actually what happens if you open a Coke bottle. Indeed, when you open the bottle, you force this reaction to this side and CO2 gas is able to escape, thus forming the bubbles. But anyway, what we want is to force the reaction through this side. In the oceans it is possible because they contain huge amounts of water, and this process becomes easy because it just involves the dissolution of CO2 inside the water. Sadly, today this reaction is not a direct solution to our CO2 problem because this molecule is very acidic. Thus, the more CO2, the more of this molecule you will produce, and thus the more acidic will the oceans be. If the water of the oceans is too acidic, that can kill almost every species that live inside this water. It would be, of course, an enormous catastrophe. There's many more examples, and there are many researches that are performed right now to solve this problem. I can't give you a larger insight, but I can tell you that the future is scientific research. If we now want to solve this major problem that humanity faces, you have only one word: research. The thing now is to invest in this research, and this research should go in two ways. First, we have to investigate new alternatives and new pathways. The second way is to limit the CO2 accumulation in the atmosphere. This can be done with the CO2 sequestration. And I have shown you two examples of this CO2 sequestration, but there are many, many more to be explored. And now it is our job as scientists to go and propose new ideas, new developments. So yeah, the answer truly relies on science and on the ability to find new solutions. The future relies on the way we manage and we use the resources that we have, and it's not only a problem linked with energy, but it's also a human problem. I hope to see you in the next video, and until then, have a good day.